Imagine for a second, you're just sitting there holding your phone and you've got one of those translation apps open. You're just like playing around with it.
Right, just plugging in random words.
Yeah, exactly. Typing in everyday English words just to see what they look like across the globe. So you type in the word God. In Spanish, the app spits out Dios.
Sure.
In French, you get Dieu. And I mean, no one bats an eye at that.
Well, completely normal.
Right. But then, and here's the catch, you switch the language setting to Arabic, the app translates the word to Allah, and suddenly, like, the entire feeling of the conversation just shifts.
Oh, absolutely. It gets tense.
Exactly. You are abruptly pulled out of this basic fun language exercise and drop straight into the middle of a really heavy-loaded theological debate.
Yeah, it's a massive psychological pivot.
It really is. And that exact psychological pivot is the focus of a really fascinating piece published today, April 6, 2026, on the website Knowledge is King.
You did a great article.
It is, yeah. The article just completely unpacks why we have this massive linguistic double standard surrounding that specific word.
And just to set the ground rules for today's deep dive right off the bat.
Right.
We are looking at this purely through a linguist's magnifying glass, not a theologian's.
Right. Good point.
Yeah, we really need to emphasize to you, the listener, that we aren't here to debate spiritual right or wrong or, to endorse any specific religious viewpoint.
No sides being taken here.
Exactly. We're just impartially reporting on the text, tracing the history of human vocabulary, looking at factual historical records, and examining the logical arguments presented in this source material about how different cultures name the divine.
Spot on. So the roadmap for this deep dive. We're going to break down the literal definition of the word, uncover some really hidden history regarding Middle Eastern Christians, trace a surprisingly connected linguistic family tree, and then examine the logical flaws of what the article calls cultural othering.
Sounds like a plan.
I think the most important place to start, based on the article, is just the core misconception that Allah functions as a proper noun.
Yes, that's the foundational error right there.
Right, because English speakers tend to treat it like a specific entity's name, like, I don't know, John or Mike.
Yeah, or Zeus or Apollo.
Exactly. But linguistically, the mechanics of the Arabic language just don't support that at all, do they?
They don't, not even a little bit. And understanding the mechanics is really crucial here. In Arabic, the word is actually contraction.
Like do not becoming don't.
Exactly like that. You take the definite article al, which simply means the, and you combine it with ila, which means deity or God.
Okay, so al plus ila.
Right. Put them together and you get a lot, which literally just translates to the God. It is a descriptive title meant to denote a singular, unique creator.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it operates exactly the same way Dieu does in French. We inherently recognize that, a French speaker isn't praying to some competing deity just because they use their native vocabulary.
Right, we don't accuse French people of worshiping the Dieu God.
Exactly. Yet when the language in question is Arabic, that basic linguistic grace is just frequently denied.
It's so wild when you think about it. Saying Allah is a different God because it's an Arabic word, I mean, it's literally like saying an agua is fundamentally different from a water.
That is a perfect analogy. It's the exact same substance, just a different vocal sound.
Right. So the source material calls this phenomenon othering. Now, I understand the general sociological concept of the other, drawing a line between us and them as a cognitive shortcut to manage complex information.
Right.
But how does the author apply that mechanism specifically to vocabulary?
Well, the author suggests that the pushback against the word is rarely rooted in actual theology.
Really?
Yeah, instead, it's essentially a psychological defense mechanism.
Yeah.
It's triggered by a fear of the unfamiliar.
Ah, okay. That makes sense.
When people encounter a language deeply tied to regions or cultures they perceive as vastly different or perhaps even threatening due to modern geopolitical narratives, they project that anxiety onto the vocabulary itself.
So the word becomes a scapegoat.
Precisely. By insisting that Allah is a different God, they're effectively keeping their own concept of the divine safe and familiar.
Wow.
They're drawing a boundary around their own language and deciding that, the ultimate truth can only exist inside that familiar border.
I get the psychology behind othering, I really do. But it still requires a massive historical blind spot to actually maintain that belief.
Oh, a huge blind spot.
Because to believe that Arabic vocabulary is exclusively tied to one specific faith means you have to completely ignore the lived reality of millions of Arabic-speaking Christians.
Right. It requires ignoring literally centuries of established history. The reality of the Middle East is just vastly more diverse than modern stereotypes suggest. Arab Christians and Arab Jews have used this exact word for the divine for centuries. I mean, long predating modern religious schisms.
The article gave some incredible specific examples of this, actually. Like, take the Coptic or Maronite churches.
Yes, the ancient communities.
Right. These are deeply rooted Christian communities in the Middle East. If you walk into a service today, right now, and open up one of their Arabic Bibles, the word used for God throughout the entire text from Genesis to Revelation is Allah.
Every single time.
Yeah. They aren't inventing a new word to distinguish themselves from their neighbors.
No, because they're simply using their native language. Why would they make up a new word for God when they already have one?
Exactly.
And, the history of how deeply this vocabulary is ingrained goes far beyond the immediate borders of the Middle East, too. The source material highlights Malta, which I honestly find to be one of the most compelling historical case studies for this entire linguistic phenomenon.
Oh man, the Malta example is wild.
It really is.
Just for context for you listening, Malta is an island nation right in the middle of the Mediterranean, and it is a predominantly Catholic country, like heavily Catholic.
A very deeply ingrained Catholic heritage.
Yet in the Maltese language, the word for God is Allah.
Right. And to understand how that happened, you have to look at the mechanisms of Mediterranean history.
Okay, break that down for us.
So Malta sits at a geographical crossroads. Over the centuries, it was influenced by everyone. Phoenicians, Romans, Arabs, Normans.
Just a revolving door of empires.
Very much. And during the Arab rule of the island, which started around the 9th century, the Arabic language took deep root.
Makes sense.
But then, when the Normans took over and the island eventually re-embraced Catholicism, they didn't wipe the linguistic slate clean.
They kept the language.
Yes. The Maltese language, Malti, evolved as this fascinating hybrid. It is actually the only Semitic language in the world written in the Latin alphabet.
That is such a cool linguistic fact.
Isn't it? So the language survived, the religion shifted, and today you have deeply Catholic European citizens praying to Allah.
So if the historical evidence is that robust, if Christians in the Middle East and Catholic nations in the Mediterranean have been using this word in their Bibles and their prayers for literally centuries, why is the modern Western perception so thoroughly disconnected from that reality?
Great question.
Like, we seem to be suffering from this collective cultural amnesia.
Well, the amnesia is a byproduct of how modern geopolitical maps overwrite linguistic maps.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
We view the Middle East and the Arabic language almost entirely through the lens of recent, highly publicized conflicts. Language becomes weaponized in media narratives.
Right, it gets tied to whatever's on the news.
Exactly. When the only time a person hears the Arabic word for God is on the evening news in the context of global tension or conflict, the centuries of shared peaceful linguistic history are just buried.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, we let the political boundaries of today blind us to the shared vocabulary of the past.
But the connection between these faiths isn't just a byproduct of shifting borders and Mediterranean trade routes, right? It goes much deeper into the actual structure of the languages themselves.
Oh, absolutely. Deep into the DNA of the language.
Because the Knowledge is King article breaks down the Semitic language family, and this is where the mechanics of the vocabulary get really fascinating.
Yeah, so Semitic languages operate on a very different mechanism than English. They're built on what linguists call triconsonantal roots.
The triconsonantal roots. Okay.
Yeah, basically, think of it like a linguistic skeleton made of 3 consonants.
Just 3 bones.
Exactly. You build different words by wrapping different vowels around those same 3 foundational bones.
Okay, so the specific root we are looking at here consists of the letters Aleph, Lamed, and He, A-L-H.
Yes. That ALH root is the ancestral DNA for the concept of the divine in this entire language family.
Wow.
If you look at Aramaic, which is historically recognized as the language spoken by Jesus, the vowels wrapped around that ALH skeleton give you the word Allah.
Allah. Okay, and if we shift to Hebrew, the language of the Old Testament, how does the skeleton adapt there?
In Hebrew, the variations built on that root, or its close cognates, give us words like Elohim or Eloah.
Elohim, Eloah. Okay, and finally, Arabic.
Where the vowel structure gives us Allah. So you have Allah, Eloah, and Allah.
That is incredible. It's less like entirely different concepts and more like, I don't know, open source software.
Oh, it's like that?
Yeah, like the Semitic root of ALH is completely identical. But over thousands of years, Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic speakers essentially built slightly different user interfaces on top of that base code to fit their local environments.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. The underlying architecture never changes.
Right.
And this exposes a glaring logical inconsistency in the othering argument we talked about earlier.
How so?
Well, the source material points out that if a person accepts that Jesus historically prayed to Allah, it defies all linguistic logic to turn around and claim that Allah refers to a fundamentally different alien being.
Yeah, that makes zero sense when you look at the roots.
They are not different entities. They are literally phonetic variations of the exact same Semitic root word, shaped by time and geography.
It's so easy to see the overlap when we're tracing a single linguistic root system in the Middle East. But I imagine once you cross into Asia or deeper into Africa, that shared vocabulary completely fractures, right?
I think so, yeah.
Because you would expect the psychological pattern to break down once the languages no longer share that ALH skeleton.
You would expect a fracture, but the article illustrates that the underlying psychological pattern holds up globally.
Really?
Yeah, they provide this amazing table of global titles for the divine, demonstrating that every culture uses its own distinct linguistic tools to point toward the exact same concept.
Okay, I want to hear some of these.
Well, even when the root languages are completely unrelated, the human pattern of utilizing local vocabulary for the supreme power is universal.
Let's look at some of those examples from the source because the contrast is striking. If we look at Greek, the word is theos, which gives us English words like theology.
Right.
In Latin, it's deus, giving us deity. And neither of those causes any cognitive dissonance for Western speakers.
Not at all.
But what happens when we move beyond the Greco-Roman influence?
This is where the cultural pluralism becomes undeniable. Look at Farsi, the Persian language.
Okay.
The word used is kuda. Now, Farsi is an Indo-Iranian language, totally separate from the Semitic family.
Completely different family tree.
Exactly. But what is truly profound is how the word is applied. Because the Persian Empire was vast and pluralistic, the language evolved to accommodate multiple faiths. Kuda is used harmoniously by Muslims, by Christians, and by Zoroastrians.
Wait, really? 3 entirely distinct religions with vastly different theologies, all agreeing on the foundational vocabulary.
Yes.
They aren't fighting over ownership of the word.
Not at all. They understand that the word is simply a vessel. And the same principle applies in East Africa. In Swahili, which is a language with deep Bantu roots but heavily influenced by Arabic trade, the word is Mungu.
Mungu.
Walk through East Africa and you will find people of varying indigenous and Abrahamic faiths all utilizing Mungu to refer to the creator.
That's fascinating.
Or in Chinese, where a common historical term is Shangdi, translating to highest deity. The linguistic vessel changes, but the conceptual cargo remains exactly the same.
So why does this matter to you, the listener? Because realizing that Kuda, Mungu, and Allah function identically to God or Dios serves as an incredibly powerful cognitive shortcut.
Absolutely.
When you hear a foreign term for the divine, your brain doesn't have to go into defense mode, assuming you've encountered an alien theology that threatens your own.
It stops that reflex to other the speaker.
Yes. You realize that humans across the globe are just using the phonetic sounds their ancestors passed down to point up at the exact same sky.
If we synthesize everything the Knowledge is King article brings to the table, the mechanical contraction of the Arabic word, the erased history of Mediterranean and Middle Eastern Christians, that ALH Semitic root we talked about, and the global application of terms like kuda, the core conclusion is pretty much unavoidable.
Which is?
The nature of the divine does not fluctuate based on the dialect of the person speaking.
The reality is independent of the vocabulary used to describe it.
Exactly. To fiercely dispute the use of the word Allah while unquestioningly accepting Dios or Dieu is a textbook case of allowing modern geopolitical bias to override basic linguistic respect.
And again, going back to our disclaimer from the start, understanding this doesn't require anyone to compromise their personal theology or change their spiritual beliefs, does it?
No, not at all. It only requires acknowledging a fundamental reality of language. A singular supreme power would, by definition, be the God of all people in every existing.
Which brings us perfectly back to the primary mission of our deep dive today. Our goal was simply to help clean the cultural lens through which we view language.
Just clear the fog a bit.
Right. By stripping away the political noise and looking strictly at the historical and linguistic facts, we can see how easily a simple literal translation can be manipulated into a massive cultural dividing line.
It is genuinely remarkable how much clarity you can achieve simply by examining the mechanics of the words we use. It removes the anxiety from the conversation.
It takes the heat completely out of the argument. So think back to that translation app we talked about at the start of the deep dive. We've seen how centuries of history and linguistic DNA are baked into a single word, and how easily we ignore that history when it feels unfamiliar.
Right, just brush it aside.
We really do. And it makes you wonder, what other everyday words, concepts, or ideas are we currently othering and arguing over simply because we haven't bothered to look up their roots in a dictionary?